Terry Sherman had always been a practical man. The vast, desolate expanse of the ranch he called home held no mystery for him until that night. It was late, and the moon hung low and full, casting an eerie glow over the rolling fields. He was walking his dogs, their usual enthusiastic barks replaced by nervous whimpers. Something was different tonight. As they neared the old barn, the dogs froze, their ears pinned back and hackles raised. Terry squinted into the darkness, and that's when he saw it. A creature, crouching in the shadows, its eyes glowing an unnerving, malevolent red. It was a wolf, but far larger than any he had ever seen, easily 3 times the usual size. Its fur was matted and dark, almost blending into the night. Terry's hand instinctively went to his rifle. He was a good shot, and years on the ranch had made him no stranger to dealing with predators. He aimed carefully and fired. The crack of the rifle echoed through the night, but the creature didn't flinch. Undeterred, Terry fired 2 more shots, each hitting their mark. Still, the beast remained unfazed, its gaze locked onto him with an almost human intelligence. The dogs were now hysterical, tugging at their leash, desperate to flee. Terry's heart pounded as he realized the bullets had done nothing. The wolf, or whatever it was, took a step forward, its red eyes glowing brighter. Terry backed away slowly, his mind racing. This was no ordinary animal. It was something ancient, something evil. The next morning, Terry shared his encounter with his family. They were skeptical at first, but the fear in his eyes was undeniable. Over the next few weeks, strange occurrences became commonplace on the ranch. Cattle were found mutilated, their bodies drained of blood. Unidentifiable tracks appeared in the dirt, leading to Anne from the woods. Then came the night when his daughter, Emily, woke the household with her screams. She had seen the creature at her window, its red eyes piercing the darkness. Terry knew they had to leave, but the creature seemed to be everywhere, watching, waiting. Eventually, the Shermans sold the ranch and moved far away, hoping to leave the horrors behind. But the terror didn't end with their departure. The new owners, the Johnsons, soon found themselves plagued by the same malevolent presence. One evening, while inspecting the barn, Mr. Johnson felt a chill run down his spine. He turned slowly, and there, in the shadows, were the glowing red eyes. The tale of the ranch spread through the town, whispered in hushed tones. Each new owner faced the same inexplicable encounters, each more terrifying than the last. The land seemed cursed, a beacon for something dark and hungry. The most recent owners, the Martins, thought they could handle whatever lurked in the night. But just days after moving in, they discovered deep claw marks gouged into their front door. On the 3rd night, Mrs. Martin saw the massive, shadowy figure with burning red eyes standing at the edge of their property. She watched, frozen with fear, as it slowly began to approach, the air growing colder with each step. Terry Sherman's warnings had been clear, but nothing could truly prepare anyone for the terror of the ranch. What was the creature? Why did it haunt this land? The questions remained unanswered, the mystery deepening with each encounter. And as the Martins braced for what was to come, the truth about the werewolf lurking in the shadows was more horrifying than they could ever imagine. The Martins huddled together in the living room, every creak of the old house amplified in the silence. The children, Sarah and Tommy, clung to their mother, their eyes wide with fear. Mr. Martin paced back and forth, his knuckles white as he gripped his shotgun. "We need to leave, Mrs. Martin whispered urgently, glancing toward the window where the creature had been just moments before. "This place isn't safe." Mr. Martin nodded, his face set in grim determination. "We'll pack up first thing in the morning. But tonight, we keep watch." As the night dragged on, the family took turns dozing in and out of fitful sleep, the loaded shotgun never far from reach. The hours crept by, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional distant howl that sent shivers down their spines. At dawn, they began to pack, throwing clothes and essentials into suitcases with desperate haste. Mrs. Martin's hands trembled as she folded clothes, her eyes constantly darting to the windows. The children helped as best they could, their small faces pale and frightened. Suddenly, Tommy cried out, "Dad, look!" Everyone rushed to the window, where they saw fresh tracks in the dirt leading up to the front porch. The prints were massive, easily twice the size of a man's foot, and they were still warm, steam rising from them in the cool morning air. Mr. Martin loaded the last of their bags into the car, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Just as they were about to leave, A low growl echoed from the woods, freezing them in place. Slowly, they turned to see the creature emerge, its red eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. It stood on the edge of the property, watching them. The sheer size of it was overwhelming, its presence radiating a primal, predatory aura. "Mister." Martin raised his shotgun, his hands shaking. "Get in the car, now," he shouted. They piled into the car, and Mr. Martin slammed the door shut, his heart pounding. As he turned the key in the ignition, the creature let out a deafening roar, shaking the very ground beneath them. The car roared to life, and they sped down the driveway, gravel flying in their wake. For a moment, they thought they were safe, but as they reached the main road, "Mrs." Martin screamed, pointing to the rearview mirror. The creature was following them, running on all fours with terrifying speed. Its eyes glowed with an unholy intensity, growing larger as it closed the distance. "Mister." Martin floored the accelerator, the car's engine straining as they raced down the deserted road. He took a sharp turn, tires screeching, hoping to lose their pursuer. But the creature stayed on their tail, relentless in its pursuit. In the distance, they saw the lights of a small town. Safety was within reach, but just as they were about to breathe a sigh of relief, the creature leapt, slamming into the side of the car with a force that sent them skidding off the road. The car came to a stop, half buried in a ditch. Dazed, Martin shook his head, trying to clear his vision. He looked back to see the creature circling the car, its eyes fixed on them, a low growl rumbling from its throat. "This isn't happening," he muttered, gripping the shotgun with renewed resolve. "Stay here," he ordered, opening the door and stepping out. The creature stopped, its gaze shifting to Mr. Martin. It growled, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. He raised the shotgun, aiming for its chest. "Leave us alone," he shouted, pulling the trigger. The blast echoed through the night, but the creature merely snarled, unfazed. "Mister." Martin fired again and again, the gunshots lighting up the darkness. The creature paused, as if considering him, before letting out a bone-chilling howl. It leapt at him, and he braced for impact, his mind filled with a single thought: protect the family. Suddenly, bright headlights flooded the scene. A truck skidded to a halt, and a man jumped out, wielding a large, silver-tipped spear. With a swift, practiced motion, he thrust the spear at the creature. The werewolf howled in pain, its body convulsing as it staggered back, finally retreating into the woods. The stranger approached the Martins, his face grim. "You need to leave this place," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This land is cursed, and that was no ordinary Wolf." "Who are you?" "Mister," Martin asked, still clutching the shotgun. "My name is Caleb," the man replied. "I've been hunting that creature for years. It's not the only one. There are more, and they won't stop until they've claimed this land for their own." The Martins exchanged terrified glances. "What do we do now?" "Mrs." Martin asked, her voice trembling. Caleb looked towards the dark forest. "There's a safe place, an old church, a few miles from here. Go there. I'll meet you and explain everything." As they drove away, the creature's howls echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder that the nightmare was far from over. The Martins knew they had only just begun to uncover the horrors that lurked in the shadows of their new home. What was the true nature of these creatures? Why were they drawn to the land? And most importantly, how could they be stopped? The answers lay ahead, hidden in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. The Martins followed Caleb's directions, driving down winding, desolate roads until they reached the old church. The building loomed in the early morning light, its steeple piercing the sky. Weeds choked the pathway, and the windows were dark, but it radiated a sense of safety amidst the encroaching wilderness. Caleb arrived shortly after, his truck rumbling to a stop beside their car. He stepped out, spear in hand, and approached the Martins with a determined look in his eyes. "We need to talk," he said, leading them inside the church. The interior was dusty and abandoned, pews in disarray, but it felt secure. Caleb guided them to the front where a large, worn table stood. He spread out a map, marked with symbols and notes. "This land has a history," he began, his voice low and steady. "Long before any of us came here, it was home to ancient, malevolent spirits. They can take the form of wolves, but they are much more than that. They're drawn to this land, cursed to hunt here forever." "Mrs." Martin shivered, holding Sarah and Tommy close. "Why us? Why now?" Caleb sighed. "It's not just you. Everyone who sets foot on that ranch is in danger. The curse doesn't care about who you are, only that you're there. But there might be a way to stop it. Mr. Martin leaned in, his expression intense. How? There's a legend, Caleb explained. A shaman who lived here centuries ago bound the spirits to the land, but he left behind a way to break the curse. It's a ritual, a dangerous one, but it might be our only chance. The Martins listened intently as Caleb outlined the ritual. It required specific items, scattered throughout the forest, each guarded by the spirits. The final piece was the shaman's talisman, rumored to be buried in a cave deep within the woods. They had to perform the ritual at the heart of the ranch at midnight, under a full moon. Failure would mean death, or worse, becoming one of the cursed themselves. We don't have much time, Caleb warned. The next full moon is in 3 days. We need to gather the items and prepare. Once we start, there's no turning back. Determined to save their family and end the curse, the Martins agreed. Caleb handed out tasks. Mr. Martin and Caleb would venture into the forest to retrieve the items, while Mrs. Martin and the children would stay at the church, preparing the ritual and watching for any signs of the spirits. The next morning, Mr. Martin and Caleb set out, armed with weapons and a list of items to find. The forest was dense, the air thick with tension. Every rustle, every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. Hours passed as they combed through the underbrush, finally locating the first item, a ceremonial dagger in an ancient, moss-covered altar. Suddenly, a chilling howl pierced the silence. Caleb spun around, spear at the ready. They're coming. We need to move. They fought their way through the forest, retrieving each item while fending off relentless attacks from the wolf-like spirits. Each encounter left them more battered, but their resolve remained unbroken. Meanwhile, back at the church, Mrs. Martin and the children worked tirelessly, deciphering the ritual's instructions and gathering supplies. As night fell, Sarah looked out a cracked window and gasped. Mom, look. Mrs. Martin hurried over, her heart sinking. Red eyes glowed in the distance, steadily approaching. Stay inside, she whispered. I'll handle this. Grabbing a silver knife Caleb had given her, she stepped outside, her hands shaking. The creature emerged from the darkness, its eyes burning with hatred. She stood her ground, praying for Caleb and Mr. Martin's swift return. As the creature lunged, she slashed with the knife, the silver blade glinting in the moonlight. It howled in pain, retreating slightly, but its eyes never left her. She knew it was only a matter of time before it attacked again. Hours felt like days, but finally, Caleb and Mr. Martin returned, battered but triumphant. They had the final item, the shaman's talisman. We need to go, Caleb urged. The full moon is rising. The drive back to the ranch was tense, the weight of their mission heavy on their shoulders. They arrived just as the moon reached its zenith, casting an ethereal glow over the land. The creatures watched from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. They hurried to the heart of the ranch, an ancient stone circle hidden in the overgrown fields. Caleb arranged the items in a precise pattern, his hands steady despite the danger surrounding them. He began chanting in an ancient language, the words resonating with power. The air grew colder, the ground trembling as the ritual progressed. The creatures howled, closing in, but an invisible barrier seemed to hold them at bay. The final step required the talisman, placed in the center of the circle. Just as Caleb reached for it, a monstrous wolf lunged at him, knocking him aside. The talisman skidded across the ground, stopping at the edge of the circle. Mr. Martin dove for it, narrowly avoiding another attack, and placed it back in the center. A blinding light erupted from the talisman, and the creatures screamed in agony. The ground shook violently, the air filled with an ear-piercing roar. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The creatures vanished, the oppressive darkness lifting. Breathing heavily, Caleb stood up, helping Mr. Martin to his feet. Is it over? Mr. Martin asked, his voice trembling. Caleb nodded slowly. I think so. The curse is broken. The Martins embraced, relief washing over them. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But as they prepared to leave the circle, a faint whisper echoed in the air, barely audible. Beware. They paused, looking around, but saw nothing. Caleb frowned, his eyes narrowing. We should go. Now. As they drove away from the ranch, a sense of unease lingered. They had broken the curse, but the land felt changed, as if something ancient and powerful still watched them. The Martins knew they would never forget their ordeal, the shadows that had nearly consumed them. And deep in the forest, Beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient tree, something stirred. The spirits were gone, but a new presence awakened, more terrifying than they could imagine. The Martins had survived, but their story was far from over. The true horror was just beginning. As the Martins drove away from the ranch, a heavy silence filled the car. They had broken the curse, but the whisper that lingered in their ears left an uneasy feeling. The old church where they had found refuge loomed in the distance, soon disappearing behind them as they followed the winding road back to town. They decided to stay in a motel for the night, too exhausted and shaken to return home immediately. Caleb assured them it was safe, that they had done everything right, but his eyes, usually so steady, betrayed a flicker of doubt. In their motel room, the Martins tried to settle down. Mrs. Martin tucked Sarah and Tommy into bed, whispering comforting words, though her heart was heavy with dread. Mr. Martin sat at the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the television. Caleb stood by the window, peering into the darkness. "Do you think it's really over?" Mr. Martin finally asked. Caleb sighed, rubbing his temples. "I want to believe it is. But there's something about this land. It's ancient, powerful. It doesn't let go easily." Later that night, as the family slept fitfully, Caleb remained vigilant, unable to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. He heard a faint noise outside, a rustling that sent chills down his spine. He grabbed his spear and quietly slipped out of the room, determined to investigate. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the parking lot. Caleb scanned the area, but everything seemed normal. Just as he was about to return inside, he saw a pair of glowing red eyes watching him from the edge of the woods. His heart pounded as he stepped forward, his grip tightening on the spear. Suddenly, the creature lunged from the shadows, knocking Caleb to the ground. He fought valiantly, but this beast was different, stronger than the others. It pinned him down, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. With a final, desperate effort, Caleb drove the spear into its chest. The creature howled in agony, staggering back before collapsing. Gasping for breath, Caleb got to his feet. He felt a deep, searing pain in his side and looked down to see blood pouring from a gash. He stumbled back to the motel, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Inside, the Martins woke to the sound of Caleb collapsing at their door. "Mrs. Martin screamed, rushing to his side. "Caleb, what happened?" "It's not over," he gasped, his face pale. "It never will be. You have to run. Leave this place." Panic set in as the Martins gathered their things. They carried Caleb to the car, his breath shallow and labored. Mr. Martin sped down the road, the darkness pressing in on them. As they drove, the whispers returned, growing louder and more insistent. The children cried, clutching their mother, who tried to soothe them despite her own terror. Caleb's eyes fluttered open, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I couldn't protect you." The road ahead seemed endless, each mile stretching into an eternity. The whispers grew into a cacophony, and the shadows around them deepened. Suddenly, the car swerved, the headlights illuminating a massive figure standing in the road, another creature, larger than any they had seen before. Mr. Martin slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The creature's claws raked across the windshield, shattering the glass. The car veered off the road, crashing into a tree. The impact was brutal, throwing everyone forward. Dazed and bleeding, Mr. Martin crawled out of the wreckage, looking frantically for his family. Mrs. Martin was slumped over, unconscious but alive. The children were trapped in the back seat, crying out for help. He tried to free them, but the creature was upon him, dragging him away. He screamed for his family, but his voice was drowned out by the beast's roar. As he fought, he saw the red eyes of more creatures emerging from the woods, surrounding the car. In the chaos, Caleb staggered to his feet, using his last ounce of strength to confront the beasts. But his efforts were futile. The creatures overwhelmed him, their howls echoing through the night. The Martins' screams pierced the darkness, their desperate cries unheard in the vast, indifferent wilderness. The whispers of the ancient curse grew louder, claiming them one by one. By morning, the ranch was silent again. The sun rose over the empty fields, the wind whispering through the trees. The land had claimed another family, their fate sealed by the ancient curse that would never be broken. And deep in the forest, beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient tree, the new presence stirred, more powerful and malevolent than ever. The cycle of horror continued, an unending nightmare in the heart of the cursed land.